706.
Welcome, everybody, to a long awaited episode of the 706 podcast. The last time we recorded, Barack Obama was president. Tony still had outstanding warrants, and Anthony was still defending Master of None. Oh, wait, never mind. That never happened. But we're very happy that you all joined us here today for another episode. The Prodigal Podcast returns. We have been on a little bit of a hiatus, laying low, as it were, but now we're ready to strike back with a movie that was released, actually, believe it or not, 40 years ago. You might have heard of it. It's called The Breakfast Club. If you hadn't heard of it, go to your nearest Blockbuster and engage in some self-edification because you're a dumbass. Now, The Breakfast Club is written and directed by one John Hughes, starring a cadre of adolescent ne'er-do-wells, and is a really interesting film in all seriousness. One that I hope we can parse a little bit because there's this idea of the Breakfast Club and where it sits in our cultural landscape, and then there's the actual movie. And I wonder sometimes when we get to these art house films, we really just engage with the movie, right? We don't really engage with the public perception or how the movie kind of iterates upon itself, develops into something totally, completely new and perhaps discordant with the original version in the public's eyes. But with a movie like this, with a movie like the one I previously hosted, which was E.T., these movies have their own place in our kind of collective consciousness. So I'm really curious to hear what folks have to say. And just kind of a little bit of a recap. I did nominate this film because I felt that it has a very crafty kind of expert way of presenting an adolescent outlook on an ever-changing American landscape in the 80s. This preceded my adolescence by some roughly 20 years. But I can still find many correlates that are somewhat at the same time soothing and scintillating, I guess, but also disquieting, right? And uncomfortable. And so it's like this oscillation between being in, kind of a saccharine fever dream, waking up, it's 1999 and it's Christmas morning and you feel all those warm, serotonin, neurotransmitters firing on, as you're living out the beauties of childhood and the ignorance and naivete that accompanies that. And then at the same time, you experience the raw emotion, the unfiltered, unadulterated horror and perhaps taste of what might be to come for you in your adult life, and trying to say that you'll be different, that it'll be different for you, that you'll somehow find purpose and meaning outside of your work and outside of these social attributes. So I think there's this juxtaposition here of a bunch of kids who are very scared, but also very interested in learning more about each other, in connecting, in fostering the qualities that make them children. Their brains are still developing. Anyways, just laying the groundwork here for a discussion. I want this to be rather a fruitful discussion. We can also go into the mechanics of the movie and whether or not it works, but I'm more intrigued, I guess, by the developmental aspects, the socio-cultural aspects. Without further ado, I will, and I've actually neglected, it's been so long. The last time we hosted, I had to do an ad read for our Telegraph sponsor. But since we're, now in the 2025, I don't have to do that anymore. But I still do have to introduce, our co-hosts here. So, in order of intelligence, please introduce yourself with your first name.
Tony.
Oh
He didn't
no,
say which or ascending or
Wow,
descending order,
not
Tony.
but
reverse intelligence.
he did,
Sorry.
he didn't say ascending or descending.
Yeah,
So I just whichever way you
Okay.
want to say it.
Order of
descending, Tony. Sorry,
intelligence.
sorry.
Okay, in that case, Tony. Tony.
I'll bravely venture that I'm in the middle of the pack. My name's Connor, but Kirk, I wanted you to do a more classic because I had something planned. Can you just introduce me? Just say Connor.
Connor.
Hey, hey, hey. Ooh, I'm Connor.
Not sure
And
what that
Anthony.
was, but
No, it's the theme. You all know the theme of Breakfast Club. I don't know. I'm sure the song has a different title, but
are you doing Simple Minds there?
is
Don't you
that
forget
the
about me?
yeah,
I
don't
Yeah.
see.
you? But you know how it begins. Hey, hey, hey.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to be really recognizable to the audience. But anyway,
Yeah. No, I mean someone's Shazam just went off on their phone. They were like, "What the hell?" Uh, but anyways, now that we're all introduced and the order of intelligence is established, I'll pass it over to my co-host. I think, let's embrace brevity here for the sake of a more dynamic discussion. We can kind of bounce back and forth as though we're sitting in a circle in suburban Chicago on the library floor, smoking trash weed and talking about our sexual experiences. So, Tony, go ahead. What do you think of The Breakfast Club? And why is it the best movie of all time?
Oh man. Well, the best movie of all time is All About Lily Shoo Shoo, as I think we've established before. So I saw this movie once before, and this was one of my handful of movies where like I didn't see Titanic until like 2 or 3 years ago. It's one of those handful of movies that are like is like a really big, super iconic, super famous movie that seemingly everyone's seen and has this huge place in our culture that somehow I had just never had just kind of passed me by. Part of that is because I don't have the best experience with John Hughes movies. John Hughes is obviously a very important figure culturally in terms of his other kind of his 80s output. You have like Pretty in Pink and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and a number of other movies that were just I keep saying iconic, but that's just what they are. I mean, they really resonated with the whole, generation of people who I guess would be like Gen Xers who grew up with these movies and they really, really kind of just resonated and people like related to them and they still get referenced today and they're movies that seemingly everybody above a certain age has seen and is kind of familiar with and even seem to be popular with younger people too, not necessarily just people who grew up with the movies, but young people today still see and seem to kind of respond to these movies. And when we talk about like coming of age movies or like high school movies and stuff, we tend to think of John Hughes movies. He's made kind of these movies are kind of like the archetypal like high school movies. These are like what we think of as like teen movies are like the John Hughes like model. And it's like what more recent coming of age movies have kind of tried to model themselves after. This is sort of the standard they're trying to kind of approach. And my problem with this is just that I think I've said before to you guys, not necessarily on the pod, but just in general, that I don't resonate with a ton of coming of age movies. And I think when I say that, I'm thinking specifically of John Hughes movies. I don't know if it's coming of age movies in general per se. It's John Hughes movies specifically. And I'm not 100% sure why that is. Watching The Breakfast Club now for the second time, I think that I can say that I like this movie. I enjoy this movie. I think it's funny. I think the acting, the five main characters are strong. There's good performances. I think the writing is sharp. The dialogue is good. There's a lot of great little funny moments, a lot of moments that are kind of just like really effective at being kind of memorable and kind of instantly iconic. I kind of get why this movie resonated, and I feel like this movie is, and you guys can chime if you think I'm incorrect about this, feel free to correct me, but I feel like this is kind of definitive John Hughes movie. Like this is the one. Like if people had to pick their favorite one, it's usually this one. But in general, I enjoy this movie. I would say though that I just feel like I don't know if my fundamental like issue in terms of not really relating to John Hughes movies is bypassed in this movie. Like I don't think there's a world where I like love this movie or it's one of my favorite movies. It doesn't feel like a movie that's necessarily for me specifically. It feels like it's a movie that was made for someone else, but I think it's well done for what it is. And I don't like hate this movie the way I hate, Ferris Bueller or something. Oh, that might also be that I'm watching it a little bit older. I've maybe chilled out a little bit and maybe don't have the same sort of like comparing it to my own experience. Like none of these five characters, I mean, superficially, I'm the most like Brian the nerd, obviously. But like I don't really relate to him. I don't really relate to any of these characters. I don't hear any of them give these soul-bearing monologues and think like, yes, yes, someone gets it. Like I don't have like, and I think that's kind of part of people who love this movie, they have a moment like I assume have a moment like that in this movie where they see a character say or do something, they're like, yes, like that's how I feel, or that's how I felt, or like this or that, and I just don't have that in this movie. And it's not the fault of the movie. I just think that element of like that relatability is like missing for me. I think the movie, I think the way it plays with the whole idea of the character tropes is well done in terms of the writing, where you have sort of like the it sets up the archetypical characters, the jock, the nerd, etc., and kind of deconstructs them. But the whole movie is kind of about how these roles and these kind of stereotypes are things that are both thrust upon these characters, but they're also things that they kind of have to choose for themselves. They're like sort of like they're cleaving to this sort of identity because that's the way they have to navigate the world. So it's not just a matter of this is the way the world sees them. It's also a matter of like, I have to adhere to this stereotype. I have to adhere to this kind of trope because that's the way that I can navigate the world. That's the way I can be successful, whether it's by getting a wrestling scholarship or whether it's by being prom queen or whatever. Is whatever the version of success is before me is the version I have to kind of pursue. So I think that's kind of interesting. And I think it's a little bit more of a sophisticated take on like the, deconstructing tropes than you might see in your average one of these movies. So anyway, long story short, I enjoy this movie, but I don't think it's ever going to be like one of my favorite movies. So
Thanks, Tony. It's interesting you say you can't relate to the movie. I feel like there's some universality here with, just the idea of identity development and formation, right? Like that's really what the movie is about. Where do we inherit our identities? Are they, are they passed down to us by our parents? Are we destined to become our parents? Do we shoehorn ourselves out of self-protection, self-defense into one category or another? Do we form a tribe or join a tribe to kind of survive and thrive? You didn't relate to any of that, Tony, based on your own experience in high school?
well, yeah, I mean, I sure. I mean, I think everyone has that. That is part of being an adolescent is the idea of identity. That's like the central concern of adolescence is like your identity and like what kind of person am I going to be? Because you don't really know yet. And it becomes vitally important that you figure out what kind of person you're going to be before when you become an adult. And then it's just like that seems almost trivial. You're just in life and you just have to do life. And the idea of what am I becomes a little bit less immediate and less important, I guess. I guess I relate to that in the abstract, but so I can't really refute what you're saying. But I didn't have a moment where I just felt that really powerful subjective like recognition of like, oh yes, I had that experience, or oh yes, I remember having those thoughts or those feelings, and I don't know, have I lost touch with that part of myself? Perhaps, I don't know, but I don't know what to tell you.
It's okay, Tony. We're all here for it, and we'll continue to explore. We'll continue to peel back your onion as we proceed. So let's head over to Connor next. Connor, how often have you seen it, or how many times have you seen the movie? What were your thoughts on this viewing? Anything change for you? Anything feel differently colored or amplified?
Yeah, no, this would be my third time, I think third time. as longtime fans of the podcast know, I watch everything the first time on cable, like the back half of it or one part of it. I saw it on cable. No, probably I watched the whole thing on cable, or maybe I saw part of it, then I watched the whole thing. First time I saw it, I kind of knew it as, oh, this classic 80s teenage romp. I had this idea of the 80s teen movie. I'm not sure what exactly was in my head, but I imagine, oh, lots of fun, like very like, quintessential Americana, the jocks and the nerds. And I was pretty shocked. I watched it. I was a teenager. I think maybe if I was not in high school, I was shortly out of high school. I watched it and I did find it like very impressive how very like earnest it was, how very serious it was about the psychology of these characters, and the very earnest and like idealistic idea that they can kind of transcend their identities. I'm not sure it says that exactly, but what I mean, this holding out this ideal that we're not just our identities, we're more complicated than that. I think I thought it was very impressive. I just didn't expect it, and I think I talked about that when we watched Heather's. Heather's is this very like tongue-in-cheek, like ironic approach to like the teen film. And this movie is very earnest. One thing I would say is that the John Hughes movies in general, I think what they're trying to do at the time was to kind of combine and balance like the fun kind of romp, the fun and wildness of teenagers, which is what teenagers were known for doing. Weirdly enough, I think it's changed a little bit. I think we think of college as the fundamental kind of carefree time, but I think people look back, and sort of in the idea, the post 50s idea of the teenager is kind of a bit rebellious, having fun, having like wild times, and learning and growing up. And later ideas of angst, come into it. Obviously, that angst was always there. But one idea, and I think I saw a little bit reading about, kind of reactions to the movie when it came out, is like wrote a refreshing, more serious look at teenagers, because teenagers often were kind of portrayed in a sort of like outsider's gaze on them, and like, look how much fun they're having, look how crazy it is, look how wild these teens are, or kind of shaking your fist and saying, look how crazy things are these days, or whatever. And I think John Hughes kind of combines both kind of the fun and silliness of being a kid, a young adult, with the kind of sex comedy, some amount of it, with a kind of like seriousness of kind of like, and I have to call it kind of a bit of like an after school special. It's a bit of like a serious, I think almost kind of like social work esque. To bring Kirk's profession into this, and almost very serious, like school counselors kind of like evaluation of how teenagers should think about themselves, how they should, very serious, like psychological kind of take on like childhood development. That is very surprising. And I think the idea, the marketing pitch of the time of all of his movies, but especially The Breakfast Club, it's not too much of one or too much of the other. Now, for me, I personally gravitate towards the serious aspects that appear mostly in the back half. We have basically the last like third of the movie is an extended kind of group therapy session that I find very cathartic. I find it very I find there are elements that are very relatable. I think that the students feel a bit more mature than they kind of would be in real life. But I can forgive that, and obviously kids can be very mature and very insightful. So I don't want to say that it's impossible. But I found it very effective, very cathartic. Now, what doesn't get me though is all of like the so-called funny stuff. Every kind of like gag, every like sort of reference to like how kids talk. Obviously, like of course it ages, right? These things are not going to age well. But I was sort of lost on when the movie was trying to be funny, was trying to kind of be relatable, amusing, warm. It kind of lost me. It felt like kind of unearned, a bit of a misstep. And the parts that were serious were good, but they almost felt a little bit like they had a hard time finding the perfect medium, perfect middle of those two things. So I really respect this movie a lot. I forgot to say that I watched it very shortly after we did our last episode. I was very optimistic we were going to do the episode quite soon. And I watched it with my girlfriend Mariana, now fiance, and we watched it. And I was a little bit, I was not as good as I remembered. I was sort of irked by various aspects of it. And then I rewatched it much more recently. Maybe not, I didn't watch it exactly back to front, but I watched, substantial portions of the movie. And I really, really enjoyed it. I had a lot more appreciation for it in the weird interval between those two watchings. So yeah, I think there's a lot to this movie. I think it's very interesting, but I think it's also interesting also for us to talk about where it kind of loses us, whether in terms of Tony, like not being able to relate to it, or like for me, like some of the comic stylings. And I think it's interesting, or maybe just also on the psychological level, how it doesn't speak to us, or does. I think it's interesting for us to discuss.
Thanks, Connor. I thought that was it was a welcome critique, as a brief critique of a movie that I do also enjoy. I understand what you're saying about the comic bits. I mean, some of the dialogue's a little there's some flourishes there. There's some stylizations that seem heavy-handed, like, yo, Wastoid, you're not gonna blaze up in here, stuff like that. It's just, but then again, I don't know. I wasn't alive in
Blaze
1985.
Up felt the most contemporary to me. You're not gonna blaze
That's
up
the one
in
that sounded. Oh yeah, well,
There
uh,
was a few that I was like, you think it's bitchin'? I was like, what, they said bitchin' back then? I don't know. I mean, obviously that's not contemporary, but like there are some words that, wow, that, and some things are
yeah,
completely anachronistic or feel so bizarre. But anyway.
yeah, yeah. Well, Anthony, I wanted you to round us out. Just give a well-balanced account of what you thought of this viewing, and just in general what you think of this film in the tapestry of the 80s, of teen dramas, all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be as eloquently put as Connor was in his kind of encapsulation. I think I have to start off though by saying that I don't know if Tony's a Brian. I think ever since he sold out and became a suit, he's much more like Principal Vernon. So let's just put that out there. I think, and going back, I'll start off and just say, I think in the last episode when you were talking about it or nominating it, I had mentioned that I'd seen this movie before, but maybe it's more accurate to say that I've seen it in bits and pieces. And I've definitely seen this whole film because every scene was just so familiar to me, but it was just broken up through the course of years of seeing it on TV, reruns, and so forth. But also seeing it in like endless parodies, right? Like, how many shows have made a nod to the freeze frame of the fist in the air to the Simple Minds song? How many have made jokes about, the wrestling kind of joke to Emilio Estevez's character? And, how many also now make fun of Allison's transformation at the end from the kind of outsider goth iconography into the kind of pinkish attire that Molly Ringwald's character dresses her in. So all this stuff, is super familiar to me in that way. And I have to say that I've gotten into many like I remember a lot of discussions. Maybe it's not as many as I remember, but I feel I got into a lot of discussions with Tony about coming of age films because contrary to him, I was often a sucker for them. I really found ones that I've liked, and Tony used to come by the dorm and tease me for them endlessly. So this should be the type of thing that's right up my alley. And while I say that, I've just never gotten behind John Hughes films. There just always seems something that just isn't for me, if I could say it that way. And this film in particular, it has a great soundtrack, but it's not as great of a soundtrack to me as like Pretty in Pink. It has some great characters, but it loses some of like, I don't know, the like flair of even the few things I like about Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And so there's just something about The Breakfast Club that may be a favorite or a fan favorite, but isn't a fan favorite for me or isn't my sort of virtue. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think, what Tony and Connor said is probably right. Is I don't know if there's another film that captures what mundane teenagers are kind of like. And even the way he allows them just to talk, and even the way he allows the camera just to kind of watch them have their little mannerisms and quirks, that feels very real to me. Even if there are things out of date, even if there are things that aren't socially normatized in the same way they were then. And so that part to me is really cool. But there's something about the film, and I don't know if it's that after school special quality that Connor talked about that just doesn't sit right with me, or just doesn't like appeal to me the way other coming of age movies when they have that kind of quality do. I don't know if there's something about the characters themselves that I just don't find the type of people I want to interact with in my own high school fantasies and reverting back are there for me. I think there's something at the same time that endlessly fascinates me about this movie for its iconography, for the way it's kind of a touchstone of the 1980s, the same way, I don't know, the Beatles are in the 60s, of course, not to that scale, but you can't think about the 80s without Breakfast Club and John Hughes. So there's something there that I am intrigued by. As another note, and I'm kind of rambling, just searching for things to talk about that Connor and Tony didn't touch on. I do remember an interview I read with John Hughes years ago. I remember John Hughes said that one of the things that inspired him to write A Breakfast Club is that he was looking around at the culture of the time and realizing how much space baby boomers had taken up. And he wanted to give something to the next generation. He wanted to give something to teenagers to sort of gravitate to and give them something to have a footprint of. And if that doesn't sum up the Gen X experience, I think it's so many ways of feeling like they're neglected, but also that they live in this great sort of cultural moment, not great social moment, but great cultural moment, is kind of interesting to me from a kind of craftsmanship perspective. And at the end of the day, I'll just say this about the film. One thing I do like and one thing I do respond to is everybody's talking about how part of the teenage experience is feeling like you're more than just the stereotype people have about you or the generalized abstraction people have about you. But I think one of the things that the movie does really well is that it's not that you would like people to see you as more complicated. It's that you would just like people to listen to you, and you would like people to listen to you who are from different walks of life than you. However, you choose to perceive yourself, or however you choose to model yourself, that feeling of being an outsider, but having other outsiders come to your willingness to share and your willingness to listen, I think is such an important part of the movie. That's truly the kind of thematic tissue here. But anyway, more to talk about as we get going.
Thanks, Anthony. So, I hear from two of my co-hosts that they're just not John Hughes guys. I don't know if that, if I can buy that. I buy it, but I want to unpack that a little bit because I wonder what that even means. You've tried to touch on it a little bit, and I guess there are certain ways that he constructs his story or, you know, depicts his story that irk you or just fall flat. For me, I think there's a timelessness to this film, but also a very dated aspect to it. So, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I feel like there's some flexibility here for different perspectives to come to, be able to kind of glean something out of it that may not be there in some of his other films, because it feels incredibly earnest, right? Feels like there's, at the end, basically all the characters, save for John, the bully or rebel, whatever he's, stoner loser, is are crying, at the end when they're just kind of talking about the effect that their parents have on them and all the pressure they're under and how they, I think Brian the nerd asks the other four on Monday, when you see me in school, are we going to still be friends? Because I consider you friends. And it's just a very sad conclusion that Molly Ringwald Claire comes to, which is just that no, we're not. Like, this is nice and everything, but it's a flash in the pan. We're all part of our individual casts, and we can't break away from those because there's just so much damn pressure. And to me, it's a very sad piece that I don't think there's that much sadness in a movie like Ferris Bueller's. I think the only sad part of that is probably the what's his name, the friend, Cameron, I believe.
Cameron?
Yeah, played by, feel forgive me, Succession. I'm only inquiring because my mom actually went to the University of Illinois with him. But anyways,
Alan Ruck.
Alan Ruck. Thank you very much, Anthony. I got stuck on that. But no, I think there's a sadness here that really isn't too present in other teen oriented films. And if there is a certain sadness, it's always within a very narrow window of appropriateness, right? Like it's always about, just straight up bullying, harassment, or it's about love and yearning, or it's about, I don't know, success and failure. Usually in sports, right? We see the teen experience a lot through sports films, Hoosiers, movies like that. So I think there isn't really an opportunity for so much earnestness in teen films, and I'm struggling to think of a parallel, to think of an analog from our time. I mean, I think we swung back in the other direction, and we didn't. I guess we didn't learn any lessons from this film. But I guess my question is, do you think this movie had any sort of effect culturally? What were any lessons learned, or did we have a kind of a reaction formation to be psychoanalytic, to basically we went in the reverse direction, right? We talked about transcending roles, and we left the movie theater and we turned on, I don't know, Cyndi Lauper, and drove home and fired up the Apple II and started playing video games or whatever. I don't know. Like, is it just kind of an enjoyable film, or is there actually something of substance that you think teens in the '80s, or maybe even veering into like early millennials, were able to take from it and use? Was this a formative film? Was it a suggested film? Did it suggest something more, something greater? Or was it just purely entertainment? Because I feel like if I were to submit that it's only entertainment and that it didn't serve to actually change the perspective of certain people who are watching it in a critical period, I think my opinion of the movie would be highly diminished. So I think it's one of those films where like I see it as very important, and maybe that's unfair. What do you think, Tony? Do you think this is an important film in that sense, or it's just a movie?
I mean, that's such a big question. I mean, I'm relatively cynical about. I mean, I guess I don't know. It's like, why do we even do the podcast, right? Why do we care about movies? Why do we care about art? It has to be because it can matter. It has to be because it can have the effects you're describing, right? Otherwise, what's even the point, right? Like we kind of have to believe if we like this movie or love this movie, we kind of have to believe that the movie at the very least, if it didn't do it at scale, which I doubt it did at scale, like on the millions of people, that everyone who watched this movie went out and cried and hugged the local nerd or whatever. I don't really think that happened, but I think we have to imagine that it happened to some people. I mean, I think that the fact that a movie is relevant and then it does resonate with people, it has to be because it spoke to them on that deeper level, right? I think it has to. Whatever it is, no matter how, dumb or surface level or what. I'm not saying the movie's dumb. You know what I mean? Whatever art resonates in that way, or like look at, like, I don't know, the music of Taylor Swift or something. If it clearly has a tremendous cultural footprint and impact on people, right? It wouldn't have that unless it spoke to something deeper. And I'm not trying to get into Taylor Swift. I'm just picking an example of something that clearly has cultural power behind it, clearly is resonating with people on a deeper, more emotional way. Um, I don't think that happens unless it's speaking to people. Now, whether that affected positive change in the world, I don't know how much it did, but maybe for some people. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we need is if it happened for some people.
And
Yeah,
maybe it's just a moment of like, oh, that I feel heard, and that just goes away. That's just a fleeting moment. Anthony, what were you gonna say?
oh no, sorry, were you gonna finish something, Kirk?
No, that's it.
Let me just jump on something because Tony said the word generally cynical was the phrase that started getting me thinking. And I think also the response to what you were asking about a moment ago, Kirk, is it's more interesting, maybe to me, but it's interesting to think about how this movie came out. You said 40 years ago, 85. So that means the John Hughes moment in like American film was really only like 3 to 5 years long. because I think 16 Candles is like 84. I could be getting these mixed up. 84, 16 Candles, Breakfast Club 85, Ferris Bueller is like 86, 87, and then we have Pretty in Pink. So, in other words, almost immediately, we have a group of high school films that are going to be like pretty much undermining or unpacking what John Hughes does. And we pretty much have done one of those, which is Heathers in 89. And I think if we think about what movies have done immediately after the John Hughes moment, is it's often to think about high school cynically. It's often to think about teenagers in a kind of cynical way, at least in the late 80s and early 90s, River's Edge, Heathers, and so forth. And there's this constant fear, I think, in high school that you hear all the time from, or maybe I did, but a lot of times you hear as a teenager that your friends in high school may be friends for life, or you hear the reverse, and that you may not always be in touch with them, right? There's always that worry in high school, I think, that you're going to lose contact or that you're going to make these connections and they don't actually permeate, they don't last, whether it's a first love, whether it's a friendship, and so forth. I think what John Hughes did that is very brilliant and very unique is he touched on those moments very earnestly, to use that word again, in a way that the culture wouldn't pretty much allow anymore. Maybe they would now, but it doesn't seem to be the case. But he treats these very serious moments for a teenager in as earnest and straightforward and sentimental as possible, almost to the limit. And then by the time the late 80s and 90s come along, those moments are still there, but we treat them so cynically. We almost joke about it. And then I think about the movies that like are coming of age films from us when we were in high school, middle school, or entering high school and maybe college. I think of like Superbad. There's like a famous moment where Jonah Hill and Michael Cera talk about how much they love each other, but it's couched in so much irony that it doesn't feel genuine to the way the Breakfast Club does. It doesn't feel that sentimentalness. I think of even Lady Bird, how also has a moment about friendship falling apart, and there's a whole layer of irony there. I think about Booksmart, and it's all couched in the same thing, which is just not necessarily so earnest and so after school special feeling. Maybe because that's the only way our culture will like currently touch on these moments. Maybe that's why like something like this is so nostalgically powerful. Maybe it's why it also feels cheesy at times. And that's not a fault on the movie. It's just a fault on maybe how far we've come from that moment. I don't know if that made sense.
No, it does, and in like a chronological sense, it's almost like we're looking back at our culture's version of maybe a love letter, an unrequited love letter written in, sophomore year of high school and cringing because it's just so unashamed and it's so naive and it's so uncool, right? To our modern eyes. And I wonder what you're saying about this, like, this a very short period of time. If this really, this string of movies really could have only been successful at the time that it came out. And I think so. I mean, you look at the 90s, we became so much the lazy ground post, milepost, I guess, is Nirvana and the uncool nature of caring about things and of hoping for a collectively bright future. So I don't know. I think there's something there, and also just perhaps there's like this willful ignorance of any socio-political aspects, right? Like it's maybe that's what it's like, a warm blanket, because it's these five white kids in a midwestern suburb, right? And the farthest they go into identity politics is talking about sex, right? And maybe a little bit about class issues, but for the most part it's a very safe, homogenous environment. And I think those types of discussions just would not resonate today. They'd be eviscerated. This movie would be excoriated if it came out in 2025. It'd have a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. Connor, what do you think about this moment in time, this kind of life cycle of the culture and where the Breakfast Club fits in 1985?
No, honestly, I've been following along with you guys with the train of thought of both of you, Anthony and Kirk. Like, this idea of like, yeah, immediately thinking about, yeah, this more earnestness, but then the cynicism that seems to follow when we stereotypically think about like Gen X as a generation. Obviously, there's all kinds of complicated breakdowns we could make within that. It's not a monolith, of course, you know. But yeah, you think of Nirvana, you think of grunge, you think of Columbine, you think of, and I think we could look at, and I agree, kind of an overall cynicism that this movie would feel almost corny, you know, to that generate or to people, you know, looking back retrospectively from the perspective of the 90s. I would say that like it definitely, if we look at like Heathers, we also see this kind of moment of an almost like cultural, because like if you remember in Heathers, I know not to make this about a different movie, but it's kind of interesting to compare it to movies we've seen. Heathers kind of is almost about this like adult obsession with teenagers killing themselves and kind of like this whole like discourse and this kind of weepy, kind of sentimental, and they have the character of the guidance counselor who's kind of herself is mocked, you know, as this kind of like out of touch boomer, you know, akin to John Hughes, who is of the baby boomer generation, you know, and has a kind of hippie-ish like idealism of how we're going to get the kids to come together and help solve, you know, the problems they were seeing with like teenage alcoholism and drunk driving and car accidents. And a lot of that was happening in the 80s and also like suicide as well, right? Like not, it wasn't just in the 90s that these things happened. These things happened in the 80s too. Such like the psychology of teenagers was something that people were really talking about at the time. And yeah, I think there's something about like even that impulse of in Heathers to say like, oh, like this is kind of lame to like pick this apart and like this is kind of like an adult thing and this is not how kids really are. This is like, you know, inauthentic or whatever it is. And you know, I'd say too, like you think about what remains of this movie. What are the references to this movie? You know, obviously, you know, to me, what sticks out to this movie when I remember it is like the scene of them crying in a circle and like some of this, like even the students kind of like collapsing in on themselves and just like finally letting go of their, you know, of their self-consciousness. You know, these are moments that stick in my head. But what you hear about this movie is like, you know, the soundtrack and the fist in the air and like eat my shorts and you know, whatever. That is the stuff that seems to like last from this movie. And, you know, obviously, like I get why people aren't constantly like, oh, didn't you guys all love the part where they cried in Breakfast Club? But like, I think there's something where that thing doesn't feel appropriate to be kind of memeified and integrated into the pop culture, you know, and so it becomes forgotten. I didn't know that Breakfast Club was like this, you know. I had to kind of see it for myself, you know. So yeah, I think there's something that our culture is a little bit like, you know, kind of toxic or kind of resistant towards this kind of like vulnerability and earnest thinking about like psychological issues. I mean, I think we see that come back a little bit with like the mental health awareness, you know, but like, yeah, there's something interesting to witness about this in hindsight.
Any thoughts on this, Tony? I mean, you know, it's a really interesting thing. I think you, Tony, you have a good sense of when movies, you know, what movies are cool and what movies aren't. I do think you have a good sense of that, and you have a good sense of when
Oh,
a director is kind of maybe swimming upstream, right? Or you know, and they're going, you know, they're taking the easy route, or they're maybe challenging preconceived
yeah,
notions.
yeah. I mean, for me, like, well, what Connor said was really interesting in that I think that this movie almost feels like the cultural window it came out is like so specific, as Anthony kind of pointed out, and like then Connor kind of pointed out that like there's the whole like new sincerity thing. So it almost feels like this movie is almost like maybe the reason it's endured is because people pine for that sincerity in the face of all kind of the irony and cynicism of the 90s. And even if people don't talk about the scene where they cry, that is the reason, whether or not they're even aware of it, that's the thing that that's the thing that spoke to people. That's the reason people like this movie. That's like the residual, like when you walk away from the movie, that is the residue, you know, that's the thing that stuck with you, whether or not you're quoting Eat My Shorts or whatever. That's why you come back to the movie, right? And I think that maybe in the 90s there was a desire for that. And then certainly in the 2000s and 2010s, there's plenty of very sincere media about things like mental illness and trauma and so forth, in which, the Breakfast Club kind of fits right in. So I think maybe that's the reason that the movie kind of came at the perfect time for that to make an impression on people. And I don't know. But as far as whether the movie's cool, I don't know. I don't know if it's. I don't really know the answer to that question. I do think that one thing that I am kind of I have my antennas up for with movies a lot of the time is whether they're kind of flattering the audience and giving the audience what they want versus challenging the audience, or kind of like being a little bit, provocative. The ultimate example of this will be someone like Mikhail Haneke, who is always trying to be as provocative as possible and kind of be a thorn in the audience's side, or like Lars von Trier, who said like a film should be a pebble in your shoe. And then the other
Peter
end of the spectrum,
Berg,
obviously, like what?
Battleship director Peter
Yeah,
Berg.
Battleship director Lars von Trier, exactly. Well, I was gonna say Spielberg, but one thing this movie does that it's the very first thing it does, and it just kind of stuck in my craw as an example of the opposite thing, where you're kind of like flattering the audience and telling them how great they are, is that David Bowie quote where he's like, "Young people are really smart. You old people who say young people are dumb, you are dumb. I am David Bowie," and then the screen explodes and you see a high school. Like it's just like. It was just like, oh my God, like that, like I think that part of the John Hughes kind of ethos always like rubs me the wrong way. And that's like a coming of age trope. I really hate the idea of like the older people just don't understand. Like we're so much more interesting and deep than like the adults can even fathom. Which even when I was a kid, I think I found like a little bit annoying. I'm not sure that answers your question at all, but that to me feels like something that very much like flatters the audience and
Yeah,
predisposes people to like the movie maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question at all,
yeah,
but
no,
that
I
was
mean, I wanted to kind of pull you in here, and I think this is a really good amalgamation of a discussion around these social issues that were definitely prevalent then and have morphed now, and what it means to be a teenager, what it means to be young, and what it means to be old. I think, a quote that stuck with me in this movie is, they're talking about, will we really end up like our parents? And the quiet girl, I forget her name, she's like, it's inevitable or it just happens. And, I think for a lot of people, it just happens. And the principal, right? He's talking to the janitor, and the janitor's like, yeah, 20 years ago, you probably got this job because you thought it'd be fun. And now you're looking at it and you're just like, oh, it's actually work. You think, the kids have changed, but actually it's you that's changed. I thought that was somewhat profound, in its own way. But one thing I want to note, it's kind of convenient. This movie is exactly as far away from VE Day as it is from the current time. And I think that's really wild to think, because it just shows how we've kind of leveled out a little bit. You know, we're we're reaching the end of history, the end of post history, perhaps. And I don't know where we go from here, but I think if we lose our sense of earnestness, we lose our sense of introspection and asking questions that may sound awkward or stupid, we run the risk of, I don't know, self imploding. But let's head over to our kind of the second phase of our podcast, the latter phase, I should say, by wrapping this all up, seeing where we stand, seeing where this movie lands, and ultimately whether or not it enters our canon, which is the question that everybody's pining over, asking over and over again. So why don't we go in reverse order? Anthony, why don't you, any final thoughts and maybe a vote?
Yeah, it's fascinating, Kirk, conversation. I think, one thing I'll just add, I had to look this up. I didn't know it off the top of my head. But the other big high school movie I think people associate with the 80s is 1982's Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is a much more provocatively mature movie in this sense, a much more, we should maybe say dirty, or much more, I don't want to say realistic, but maybe a much more lurid take on teenagers who engage in jobs, working class life, friendship battles and outbreaks and defeats, who engage in sexual relations that are emotionally alien. And so maybe there's something to this like Reagan moralism that comes in that allows for Hughes to be so earnest too, um, which is just one thing that popped in my head. But anyway, with all that being said, one thing is I would like to know how many films we actually have in 706 now. But I have to say that after hearing everyone's opinions, after hearing everyone talk about not just the social aspect, but what they liked, um, I'm willing to maybe give this film another chance at some point down the road. And I'm willing to try to be convinced by it because maybe I am like Vernon, and maybe I care too much about other opinions. So because of that, I'll give it a very soft yes. The Breakfast Club, soft yes.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. I believe we went to Connor next.
Okay. Gonna pull a little reverse Kirk for you. What I didn't mention was the ending. Okay, the ending is bad. The ending, okay, maybe arguably it's sort of like it is a provocation because it literally undoes everything that happens, right? It's sort of like Allison, the weirdo character, has to become normal. She's normalified by the princess. Everyone reverts to their roles. I hate. Don't ask me why that I identify with this character, but they make Brian like write the essay where they like have sex and whatnot. I found that awful, you know. And they just leave him to like, and watch
But he
the
wants to
John
write the
guy make
essay.
out with the new like prettified, girlified, normalized Allison. It was like awful. I find it horrifying. But maybe it is itself a kind of a provocation, a kind of like, well, they revert to their roles, but what is it that is transcendent in each of them of their own roles? That being said, like I can't knock like the overall like arc of the movie. I do think that is a big knock against it is the ending. But I think the high highs of the movie in the middle in terms of, and I also love like the moment where Bender, the first time we get this like needle drop. So when Bender's, acts out his father hitting him, he kind of goes into a trance and his father hitting him, and then the music comes in. There's something like this is a very serious, attempt to kind of capture this emotion. It's almost operatic. And I really admire that. And I think along these lines of whether we're for earnestness or irony, I'm going to be on the side of earnestness. I want that to be on the record. I really admire this movie's seriousness about its topic, it's about its subject. And yeah, I'm going to give it a yes, semi-hard yes.
That makes me happy. Thank you, Connor. I'm very happy this movie's in our canon. I think the ending is very flawed, but I do like the touch of her giving him what is likely a genuine diamond earring, or we're supposed to believe it is. Um, Tony, I guess the question I'll ask you along with your vote, do you believe that Claire lost her virginity in that faculty closet, or was just a few kisses, or what did you expect? Or I guess where did your imagination take you on this viewing?
Where did the imagination take me? I don't know what happened in the faculty closet, but I'm sure it was very shortly after the film, if not in it. I'm kind of relieved Connor said yes because I don't have to make the hard choice. I'm gonna give it a soft no. Don't dislike this movie. Don't hate it by any means. I think my subjective gripes with it stand. Two coming of age movies that I really relate to and would recommend to anybody. As I mentioned before, All About Lily Shushu and then Gus Van Zant's Paranoid Park are two movies that I saw that I distinctly felt like, oh yes, like I can recognize my teenage self in these movies. For what it's worth, if anyone's interested.
This was Tony's vote just now was basically like, Susan Collins voting no on some bill that's already been passed,
I
just
mean,
so
it
she
was
can.
anyway. It literally was that.
it can go on
Or
the
the
record,
best.
that she's like pro, conservative rights and all that stuff. So it's merely for vanity. But anyways, I
Also, they
appreciate.
do say in the movie it is now 7:06, which will be good to put in here at some point.
Oh,
That part was
wow.
sick. Part was sick. I'm gonna put it in, you guys.
That's
Find a
pretty
way.
good. Oh, I didn't even. Oh man, is that the first 706 shout out we've ever had? I
That
don't know.
might be. I can't imagine. Yeah.
There's actually one
Um,
hidden in every movie we've done, but that's for the
like
real fans
Mickey,
to
hidden
find.
Mickeys. All right. Well, in case you don't know, when we're filming this, it is officially spoopy season, and the time of skeletons, sorcerers, Dracula, and Frankenstein's monster is upon us. We are in Halloween season. So, in honor of our tradition, my three co-hosts are going to put forth a scary, hopefully scary movie, not just some bullshit with like, I don't know, trick or treat scene in it. Yeah, I'm not nominating Big Daddy because of the scene where he goes trick or treating. No, I want to be scared. All right. So if you want to be picked, you have to choose something that's going to scare me. And Connor, you get kind of a pass because I know you don't like scary movies very much or horror films that much. So I'm amenable to creativity, but in general, I'm here for the frights. Anyways, let's who went least recently? I have no idea.
Wait,
Was
wait.
that the
I got it here. So it was before this was Postman Rings Twice, Coherence,
Connor?
Red Rocket. So I was least recent because I did Red Rocket.
Oh yeah, Anthony did
Okay.
coherence. All right, Tony, what's the order
All right.
of
So
nominations?
I'm gonna go first just so my decade doesn't get swiped.
Yes,
And then I'll
the
have Anthony go second, Connor third, I think.
so the decade bylaws in effect. Once a decade's taken, you have to move to a different one. You have to move house. All right, could Tony go ahead?
Yes. Okay. So I had to kind of think on this one. I didn't have one really ready to go, but I was looking through my kind of master list of films that I saw, and I'm like, oh yes, this one. This is good. This is good. So my pick is a film by Kurosawa, not Akira Kurosawa, who we've done before, Kiyoshi Kurosawa. The other Kurosawa, who's another Japanese filmmaker, obviously, and he's known. He has a lot of different films, but he's known primarily for horror. He has a very unique sort of vibe and tone and atmosphere, and he is sort of a cult. He's not quite like I don't know if he's like on the level of like Ryosuke Hamaguchi in terms of his like international renown, but he's definitely respected and he has a very serious like cult following. He has very like a lot of hardcore fans. So the film I am picking is Cure from 1997. This is kind of a procedural serial killer type movie. It heavily influenced the movie Longlegs, as well as the films of Ari Aster has said it's like the most perfect film of all time. So it's definitely a movie that contemporary horror filmmakers are like really into. And basically, it's kind of a police procedural about a serial killer who is acting via hypnosis. So there are these people who are committing these really grisly murders with no memory of doing them and no understanding of why they did them. And the detective is trying to figure out what exactly is going on. It's an extremely slow paced, unsettling, atmospheric horror movie. That's one of the best I've seen in recent months. And I'm very excited to show it to you guys if you have not seen it. I'm curious if any of you have seen it.
All right, thanks, Tony. Cure. Not seen it. I'm not sure. We'll get to the rebuttals. Anyways, who was next?
Was it me, Tony? Cool. Okay, so I always want to threaten to rage quit on Tony's Halloween pick because he's done that to me in the past. But I won't. I'll be a bigger man than that. So I'm glad he didn't take the 1970s, Kirk, because what I have to offer is 1974's Black Christmas. This is, in my opinion, one of the most unsettling movies I've ever seen. unsettling on the level of The Strangers. But it's about a group of sorority girls locked away one night, of course, leading to Christmas, when a serial killer is on the loose. It takes the most conventional horror movie plot you could ever imagine and perfects it. It is absolutely horrific. It is absolutely full ready for Spooktober. It is the opposite of Tony's highbrow film that I don't even think he likes. I think he just kind of picks it for reasons like J-pop or something. But no, Black Christmas. I'll say more in the rebuttals. But from 1974, starring the immaculately beautiful Olivia Hussey.
All right, she is a hussy. So Connor, go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, my decade of choice was taken. We are not going to watch Scooby-Doo Escape from Zombie Island. That was 1998. Tony beat me out. I feel like he almost knew. He knew I was going for Zombie Island, but he sabotaged my plans yet again. Okay, as you know, I have issues with horror movies. It's not a genre I gravitate to. I didn't like Long Legs, for instance. I'm like, why do I think I'm going to like this movie? Or after I watched it, I was like, I'm just not so enthused. The genre doesn't really speak to me. But in preparation for Halloween, I've been watching a retrospective series of 1950s monster movies, like your classic ghouls and ghosts and Vincent Price movies and kind of aliens and Creature from the Black Lagoon and all that stuff. And guys, I have to say, one movie is a standout, standing head and shoulders above the rest. I'm talking about 1958's The Fly. I know you might want to see the Goldblum The Fly from the 80s, but I have to say, The Fly is where it's at. It is a very unsettling movie. Obviously, it has the limitations of its practical effects, but I'll tell you, they pull off some very kind of freaky stuff with these practical effects that they did have. And it's a movie that's carried by its performances, which are maybe a bit cheesy, but also very intriguing. It's this in this technicolor kind of dreamscape of a movie visually, and I think it's a powerful kind of psychological, it has metaphorical valences in the same way that Goldblum's The Fly in the 1980s has a lot of like metaphorical qualities or things that were going on then. I think this movie too is very deeply metaphorical about deep like social anxieties of the time. I think it'd be very interesting for us to discuss. And you're going to be very like, gently spooked and sort of ha 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 kind of spook. But I guess Kirk probably is not going to go for it. We'll see.
Interesting. You never know. You never know. Let's hear the rebuttals. Uh, by the way, what Anthony was referring to, I believe one time Anthony pitched a movie that Tony said, what did he say? I just recently saw it, and so I don't want to
He
watch
said,
it
I
again.
really, really, really don't, don't want to watch. Don't
The
look
thing was
now.
Don't Look Now. I had just watched Don't Look Now and I did not care for it. But I did not rage quit. I would force would have watched the film had it been picked.
His exact words after we wrapped up, well, I will not watch the film and I will threaten to walk out
Yeah,
if we
it
watch it.
was, yeah, it was almost our Yoko moment. But Tony, go ahead with some rebuttals.
Well, I've seen all of these. They're all great. Black Christmas is a classic slasher. The 50s Fly, I actually really like. I can vouch for the 50s Fly. I'd say that I might prefer it to the 80s one, which is not what I would typically say, I don't think. I like the 80s kind of gore fest remakes, and the 80s Fly is great in its own right, but the 50s one is surprisingly disturbing for its time. It has some kind of unsettling moments. Very good classic monster movie. I think mine has sort of there's a sort of mastery of tone and atmosphere that I really seek in horror movies. Like to me, like horror is like it's a genre that really tests like kind of the bread and butter filmmaking elements, like in terms of building tension, in terms of constructing a scene and all these things, and like basic elements of craft are really pushed to their limits in horror, and the best filmmakers I think are the best at making horror. And I think this is a movie that shows someone at kind of at the height of their craft and achieves a kind of alchemy where the whole is kind of greater than the sum of its parts. You watch a scene or you watch a film and you're like, what just happened to me? How did that just happen? What exactly went into that? I'm not putting it very well, but as far as like the heights of both cinema and scares, I think this movie excels. So of the three movies, this is my favorite, which, obviously, yes, I pitched it, but I have seen all three. They're all great. I don't think there's a wrong choice, but I think if you want to be unsettled, I think mine is the one to go for.
Okay. All right. Starting to get a better sense of these three, none of which I've seen. Kind of going in blind here. Anthony.
Yeah, I think Tony's film sounds interesting. The comparison to Longlegs sort of lost me. I was not a huge fan of that movie. But there's something I think to these slow kind of burn Asian films of the last like what 15, 20 years that really do capture, I think, the eeriness of investigation murder in a way that just that does kind of leave me feeling phased. And maybe I'm giving this movie the benefit of the doubt of doing that because it has been on my list for a long time. I've just never commit to it. I think Connor's film, I would agree with Tony, actually. It's been over 10 years since I've seen it, but I actually remember preferring it a lot to Cronenberg's movie remake, which I've never actually really cared for. So, there, I recommend Connor's film as well. I think what Black Christmas does that these other films don't sound like they quite do, or from what I remember, is offer us a true kind of October release. Tony called it a slasher movie, and it is arguably the original slasher movie, at least in the post-psycho moment. It comes out 4 years before John Carpenter's Halloween. It handles, I think, this kind of eerie atmosphere exceedingly well in just 90 minutes. It offers characters that are actually, I think, human beings and not just set candy or eye candy. It offers something, I think, that is deeper than most slasher movies are often credited for. And it's a movie that I think that does something that is really unique to the B movie or to the horror movie experience, which is take something that was not intended to be great, take something that was probably meant for like a B movie midnight release, and elevate it to something truly remarkable. The coloring, the killings, the murders, the haunting atmosphere, and that unsettling creepiness that is truly a October film. So that's why I think we should do Black Christmas.
All right. Connor, go ahead.
Well, what can I say? I haven't seen the other two movies. As you know, I'm not versed in the genre. They sound very interesting, both of them. Anthony has a kind of like the foundational kind of film history of horror kind of pick. Tony's, I've not even really heard much at all about Tony, so I'm very curious about that as an influence and clearly a movie that he really enjoys on like an aesthetic level. But I'll say if you want spills and thrills, you have to watch The Fly. And also, Kirk, can you think of any movie that is set in Montreal, Canada? I can't. And maybe you'll find that interesting. It's a sort of curious. It has an actual setting and a place, which you wouldn't really expect for like a 1950s movie. That's sort of a monster movie, you know. Obviously, some that are in exotic places, but it's kind of interesting. Anyway, but I think if you're in the mood for this sort of thing, Kirk, I think you would really enjoy it and find it like a very fun watch. But I get it's sort of on the opposite spectrum of Halloween movies.
Liaising with the Quebecois might be its own form of horror, but let's see. All
Sure.
great choices here. No duds. Sometimes there have been some duds in their own right. But you lead me with. I mean, you all make really impassioned arguments, and I could see us having successful episodes for all three. I just, it comes down to me to choose, and it's the time tested, method that I employ, which is traditionally been which movie would I enjoy most, or which episode would be the best. And so, I think I've gone down both avenues in the past. I've been kind of like selfish, one for me, one for them kind of thing. And I'm sure we all have. So I think when I think of all the Halloween scary movies we've done, I feel like we may have veered a little to the supernatural side. So I am kind of interested to get into the horror that is the depravity of man. So Tony, I will choose yours. Cure sounds very interesting. The Ari Aster quote, you could have just made that up. If you did, kudos to you, but that definitely intrigued me. So what do you have to say for yourself?
I think after we watch it, you might be like, "What do you have to say for yourself?" But no, I'm very happy. I think it's a good pick. I think it'll be. I think we'll all have something to say about it, which is what I always say. But I think we will all like engage with the movie for sure. I think it's a good spooky Halloween pick.
All right. Well, Tony, congratulations. Uh, I'm sure you'll be celebrating tonight. Celebrate the victory and the impending Halloween special. But in the meantime, let's head down to Houston Street and Katz's Deli. Anthony, take us away.
I'll have what she's having.